Start when you are.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 242nd meeting of the Program Management Committee. Thursday, May 25th, 2023, 5:30 p.m. Can I get a roll call?
I will let the record show who is the trustees who are present with trustees Wabi and Watson online.
There are no comments by the chair. Comments by the executive director. Brian?
Thank you, Chairman Nikozison. Trustees, MSD staff has scheduled tonight's Program Management Committee meeting at the request of the trustees. After the staff presentation and the board action introducing the contract and appropriation for the Bissell and Lime wastewater treatment facilities fluidized bed incinerators at the April 13, 2023 meeting, the Board of Trustees requested that staff provide additional detailed information for discussion and evaluation of this project prior to requesting adoption. Since that time, there has also been public comments regarding the project. Staff will use this meeting to provide information requested by the Board of Trustees so they may continue to fully evaluate this project. After staff's presentation tonight, I will offer options to the Board of Trustees on schedules for additional needed meetings and when the Board of Trustees wish to consider the contract and appropriation for this project. Chairman, that concludes my comments.
Thank you, Brian. Rich?
Good evening, trustees.
Good evening.
Good evening, trustees.
Good evening.
Thanks for giving us this opportunity to present this additional information this evening. Next slide, please. Just a repeat of what Brian said, as for the agenda item, we're here to provide additional details on the Bissell Lime fluidized bed incinerator project. The ordinance that you're considering authorizes staff to enter into agreement with Kosik Blocker LLC that appropriates the initial funding of $101 million from our fiscal 23 budget with future appropriations in future fiscal years, totaling approximately $900 million. Hopefully those online could hear me. Next slide, kind of the agenda tonight. I'm going to lead things off, give a little bit of background on the timeline that got us up to the current ordinance. I'm going to turn it over to Jay Hoskins. Jay is the Assistant Director for Engineering in charge of our environmental compliance and is our most knowledgeable expert on biosolids treatment. And he's going to talk about kind of how we got to the solution of replacing the multiple hearth incinerators with fluidized bed incinerators. And then Jay is going to turn it over to Brad Navoy. He's spoken with the board before regarding the procurement and the cost escalation that we saw in the project. He's going to give some input on that. And then finally, at the end, we're going to turn things over to Brett Berthold, the Director of Operations, to close things out and offer questions. We'll give opportunities for a question kind of after each one of us speak, kind of so if you have one, you don't have to hold it till the end. Trustee Wabi, Trustee Watson, if on your phone you can look, if you raise your hand, Ashley will kind of get our attention so you can ask your question, or just go ahead and interrupt us and we'll try to answer your question. What you'll find, if you look at the current slide, kind of the project goals for the project, and we'll hit these throughout the project or throughout the presentation, but you'll see that we've accomplished the goals that we intended for the project, obviously to improve air quality and meeting new air emission standards, and indeed addressing future regulations that impact biosolids. We found a biosolids solution that'll meet all our MSD's long-term needs, not just at Bissell and Lime, but our other plants as well. We'll replace the aging multiple hearth incinerators that have reached the end of their useful life and are in need of replacement. And then finally, you'll find that we've considered all the additional impacts that come into play, particularly our customers, with our decision. Next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly cover the timeline. It starts around 2009 through 2011, but it really started much before that. Obviously, our treatment plants, particularly Bissell and Lima, were built in the 1960s. So in the early 2000s, they were reaching about 50 years old. So a lot of things are going on at the plants. We're always looking at our assets. And two of the major assets at both those plants, the multiple hearth incinerators, we were doing a lot of maintenance work on those. Simultaneous during that same time in the late 2000s through 2009-11, there were new regulations that were being formulated by the EPA regarding incineration of biosolids. We were kind of monitoring that. And we felt like it was probably a good time to enlist a consultant to take a look at our solids handling at all of our plants, particularly at Lima and Bissell. So we started a comprehensive biosolids handling plan, which was pretty much our roadmap for getting to the replacing of the incinerators at Lima and Bissell. And as we suspected in 2011, there were new regulations put in place for both existing incineration and anything new that would be installed. Obviously, anything new installed would have higher, more stringent requirements. Jay's going to talk a little bit about some of those regulations under his talk. So at that time, the new regulations for existing did require the district to make improvements to our scrubbers at both of those plants during that 2013 through 2016 timeline. As we were doing that, it became pretty evident that probably our best plan would be to proceed with a biosolid solution at Lima and Bissell. So we revisited the original comprehensive solids plan, which recommended fluidized bed incinerators for Bissell and Lima. We took a look at that and refined the scope, came up with a preliminary scope, and then a timeline of when this construction or when this project would take place. What we found is that it was really going to end up stacking right on top of our largest consent decree project, which is our Lower Middle River to Pear Tunnel project. At that time, the project cost for that tunnel was in the $700 to $800 million range. Which we were just getting started with design, and we were going to be stacking another large project right on top of that, which was going to have an impact on our rates. So we decided at the time to go to the regulators to see if we could get relief to push the large CSO program out by 4 years, so we could then, during this time frame, which we're in right now, construct the fluidized bed incinerators. We were granted that consent decree modification, extended the consent decree out and pushed the major tunnels that are work still to be done, pushed those out of the program. We started moving forward then with the project and hiring of an owner's representative for our design build process for the Lima and Bissell fluidized bed incinerator project. Since that time, we've been in the procurement process. Brad's going to kind of walk you through where we've been there for the last 3 years and up to where we are tonight. Before I turn it over to Jay, are there any questions? I went through that fairly briefly, but I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, I have a question. So prior to 2019, was there consideration of any alternatives to the incinerators?
Yeah, Jay's going to cover that, all the alternatives that we went through. All right, Jay.
Thank you, Rich. Good evening, trustees and guests. Ashley, can you advance to the next slide, please? Thank you. Before I speak about our search for an engineering solution for MSD's biosolids, I want to provide some background that may be helpful to understanding how we got here. In every wastewater treatment plant are processes to clarify the wastewater, which allow it to be discharged as clean water. Biosolids are the waste product that's created from the wastewater clarification process. Biosolids treatment and disposal is therefore necessary, and it's highly regulated by EPA and DNR. Bissell and Lemay are MSD's biggest wastewater treatment facilities and the largest facilities on the entire Mississippi River. Their biosolids are incinerated. The burning produces a sterile ash that is hauled to an MSD-owned landfill for disposal. The biosolids treatment process that MSD uses now, which is outlined in that green dashed line on your slide, are at the end of their life. These processes are over 50 years old, and it's time to replace them. Next slide, please.
Excuse me. Could I ask a question? Where's the landfill these things go to?
The landfill is called the Prospect Hill Landfill, and it actually sits at the northern border of St. Louis City and St. Louis County.
Trustee Wabi, that landfill is owned by MSD and solely used for ash disposal.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Some of the major factors in searching for a biosolids treatment solution are the location, quantity, and chemistry of the biosolids. The majority of MSD biosolids, at least 80%, are processed today at Bissell or Lemay. It makes sense to treat biosolids at Bissell and Lemay because these facilities are the ones that produce most of them. MSD produces a significant quantity of biosolids at its 7 wastewater treatment plants. To give you an idea of the scale, MSD produces about 40% of all the biosolids created by Missouri utilities. And that's what this slide shows, the percentage of biosolids created at the individual plants and the total for 2022. Additionally, the quantity and chemical makeup of the biosolids that MSD must process is significantly affected by the flow of the Mississippi River. When the river is high, the inflow from the river comes to the wastewater treatment plant, our biosolids quantities go way up, and the amount of organic material or fuel in the biosolids goes down. When the river is low, biosolids quantities go down, and the fuel content increases. So when we are looking at technologies that can meet our needs, the wide variability in biosolids quantity and fuel content is a major factor that we must engineer for. Also, this variability is something out of our control, and we can't predict when it will happen. Next slide, please. Our team has been studying this problem for a long time, and we have investigated the matter thoroughly. At a high level, there are essentially 3 approaches to treatment and disposal of biosolids: digestion to make fertilizer, landfilling, and incineration. We have looked at various options for all of these. Another consideration is that the regulatory requirements for using biosolids as a fertilizer will be much more stringent soon due to changes that EPA is making to address the so-called forever chemicals, also known as PFAS. The first 3 boxes on the left side of the diagram here are all versions of technologies that use anaerobic digestion to make fertilizer. So anaerobic digestion and land application, anaerobic digestion and landfilling, thermal hydrolysis and bag fertilizer, or thermal hydrolysis and land application. All of those would be variations of a digestion process. Those digesters work better with consistent feed rates and content of fuel. For all of these, the variability in biosolids quantity and chemical makeup that I mentioned would make treatment operations with digesters very challenging. Also, each of them would cause a domino effect of other major facility changes, infrastructure needs, and costs. And digestion will not remove PFAS from biosolids. While each of them has a different disposal method, each of those methods has limitations and additional costs. And therefore, the team concluded that digestion technology is not the best approach for MSD. We also thought about building a new biosolids landfill, but we concluded inherently that was not a good plan. We looked at rebuilding and retrofitting the existing incineration equipment, but based on the condition of those existing incineration facilities, we determined that wasn't a good long-term solution. And the solution that the team landed on was replacing the existing biosolids incineration equipment with modern, resilient, and cleaner fluidized bed incineration facilities. The new facilities are designed to handle the variability in biosolids quantity and chemical makeup without other facility changes. Fluidized bed incineration is also a promising PFAS destruction technology. Also, included with our emissions control processes that include granulated activated carbon, that should remove PFAS from the exhaust. Finally, we'll be able to continue to use and dispose of ash in our landfill. I think I heard a question from Trustee Wabi.
You said it's a promising PFAS mitigation process, but is it proved? Does it work, or is it it's incomplete yet?
It's being researched by a lot of folks, and the answer lies in which PFAS are you talking about? There are thousands of these chemicals, and right now the chemicals that EPA is most focused on, this technology is effective against treating. There may be other chemicals in the future that we need to consider, but for what we know right now, it is an effective technology.
Thank you.
Any questions? Next slide, please. Excuse me. The team also investigated energy recovery, combining fluidized bed incineration with steam generation or power generation. The challenge that we ran into was that user demand and payback didn't meet the additional investment in either steam or power generation technology. However, there may be future opportunities in this area, and both facilities could be retrofitted. We also discussed our plans with key community stakeholders and took their input. I feel that it is significant that the Missouri Coalition for the Environment, the NAACP, and Greater St. Louis have all expressed support for our recommended approach. So after examining the matter in detail for many years, the team concluded that investing in new fluidized bed incineration technology is the best choice for MSD and our community. Importantly, MSD has the environmental permits and clearances to begin construction now. DNR and EPA recognize not only the benefit of the reduction in emissions, but also that the project will position MSD for complying with future regulations. And now I'm going to hand the presentation off to Brad to talk about the results of the procurement and project costs. Happy to answer any questions now. Thank you.
So as Jay mentioned, my name is Brad Nevoy. I'm Assistant Director of Engineering over the Design Division. Jay did an excellent job laying out how we got to the right solution for this project. MSD does not take any big decision without making a lengthy, methodical process out of it. I'm here in part to go over that extensive process that we followed in selecting the right design build team. This was a decision that was not taken lightly as well. The procurement was a significant investment in time from numerous individuals from several departments around MSD, as well as our owner's rep team. Very qualified individuals. They all take it very serious, trying to get the right solution for our ratepayers. So that being said, next slide, please. The three things I wanted to cover today were first, as we discussed, the procurement process that we used for this project to help give you some background on that. Second, I will discuss fluctuations we've seen in the project cost over the last several years and some causes for that. And finally, I will touch on some of the things we've done along the way to help control the project costs during the life of the project. First, I want to go over the design build procurement. Design build, we've gone over this before, but it really is a collaborative process. And we start out with MSD working with our owner's rep team, who has experts in this area, and put together a 30% document or 30% design, which in turn becomes a scoping document for the design build teams to start their process. Ultimately, the design build teams work in conjunction with MSD and our owner's rep to refine the process and come up with the best solution. They work extensively through confidential meetings where they bounce ideas off of us, and they ultimately come up with what they feel is the best solution using experts in design, construction, as well as technical experts, especially on a project like this. Ultimately, they have to do enough to come up with a bid price, and they have to take a lot of things into account when they're coming up with their bid price. The procurement is broken into two pieces. There's a technical piece, or the quality aspect, where they show us what they're going to do, what they're going to build for us. And then that first technical piece comes in, and that's scored first, and we release the scores from that. And then the price proposals are then opened, and they're scored. In this case, both the technical and the price were both worth 50% of the scoring here. And on this particular project, Kokosing Plocker was the highest technical score and the lowest price. So they really they were winners on both aspects of that part of the project. Two things that I'd like to point out just for perspective. This is a 5-year construction project, so it's a longer than usual construction project for us. It's anticipated it would be complete in 2028, and Rich said that kind of lines up with our tunnel construction that would come after that. Design build proposers have to price risk into their proposal. Next slide, please. We started this project back, I remember some of our first meetings when in-person meetings were common and everybody did in-person meetings. We've seen a lot of changes since that over the last 3 years. This slide kind of gives you some perspective. Obviously, we had the pandemic, and that disrupted a lot of labor and supply chain things along the way, as well as some other major events that have happened. It affected a lot of things throughout our economy. Inflation really took off, and all that really played into escalation of cost on the construction. Next slide, please. So escalation of cost really shows up in risk in several different things that as far as materials, the material cost and the availability of materials has become a real problem during this project. Supply chain, just the availability of specialized equipment. I know we wait long periods of times just for generators, and those are minor in comparison to some of the specialized equipment we have here. Labor availability has been a problem throughout our economy, which has ultimately increased the cost of labor as well. Construction market activity, there's still a lot of federal money that's out there that's still working its way through the system. So there's a lot of projects that are demanding attention, demanding supply and demand for the contractors and the labor that is needed. Another thing to point out that's somewhat unique about this project, this is being built at 2 of our largest plants. They also have to build the new facilities and keep our existing facilities running at the same time. So that's a unique challenge for this project as well. All that goes into construction escalation. Not only the current cost that the contractor is looking at when they go to bid, but they also have to predict what that's going to be all the way through 2028 and different things that they will encounter along the way. So next slide, please. Some things that we kind of milestones along the way when we talk about project cost escalation. In 2021, we were very early in our procurement. The owner's representative put together an estimate of $575 million. for the project. In June of 2022, we could already see things related to the pandemic that were affecting a lot of the things that would drive cost. We asked our design build teams to provide us an estimate of cost to help us program our funds. There was no commitment to this estimate at that time, and it was still very early in the project. But they had to price in their unstable market conditions, workforce concerns, commodity prices, equipment costs, much of what we talked about earlier. At that time, their estimate was $800 million for the project. Ultimately, when the price proposals were turned into us in December of 2022, we had both a base price and an alternative price. We incorporated an alternative price to help bring the cost down. We received 2 of the 3 bids that were within 12.6% of each other. And in the construction industry, we call that pretty good bids. That kind of really reflected the market value for the project at that time. On a project of this size, those 2 were very competitive. The price that the lowest alternative bid was for $890 million, and that's really what is reflected in our agenda item.
What's the percentage of that difference between the 2 close ones and?
I'm sorry, sir?
What's the percentage of the difference between the 2 close and the lowest?
Between
the 2 closest ones were 12.6%. Let's say contractor
that would be the
BNC.
lowest and the second lowest are within 12.6 of each other. There was also a third bid that was significantly more.
Okay.
Yeah. So next slide, please. Just for perspective again, this is a chart that CBRE has put out to kind of show, they produce an index. CBRE is one of the largest, if not the largest, real estate and investment firms in the world. And they produce an index that takes a lot of different things into account. They use a lot of different indices to roll it into one. You can see where the blue arrow is shown on this graph. That was our estimate provided by our owner's rep that was very early in the procurement. And we all know things really, inflation, labor, all the things we talked about really drove cost up after that. The orange arrow that you see there was the estimate about the timeline. The estimate was provided from the design build teams. And then you can see the graph starts to fall off here in 2023. The green line, as you can see, though, construction escalation is not going to drop off. Prices aren't going to drop off immediately as quick as our inflationary values go down. So we're going to still see increases in the project. And I think to try to bring perspective, the contractors have to price that into there. So that's part of the escalation that we've seen. They're projecting a 6 to 9% in construction escalation in 2023. And I think that would be consistent with what we're seeing in other portions of the market. Next slide, please.
So real quick, going back to that other slide, the original bid, or the original estimate, I'm sorry, was 2018, and that was 360 million.
It was 575. Oh, I'm sorry.
Really?
I'm sorry. The 2018 estimate, yes.
Okay.
I think that was very early. I think the scope of the project changed when that estimate was put together to where we ended up with the original $575 million estimate.
How did the scope change?
I think it had to do a lot with redundancy. When we go to build this project, you have a series of incinerators, and as those incinerators need maintenance, you have to take them down and maintain them. So you may have only 2 of the 3 incinerators running at a facility at a time. And I don't think that was correctly taken into account with our early estimate.
So the early estimate was to replace, 2 of them or something, and we recognized, well, we should have one backup, and that's why it increased?
Correct. That's a pretty good summary of what I think the difference was, yes.
Okay.
So this project was bid on a design build basis, you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Is that normally how MSD bids these kind of projects, or?
We we do a large number of projects where it's just a straight bid, where it's not a design bid, but a design bid build. But we've done a number of facility projects. On this project, I think it was the absolute right choice. It allowed us to do a collaborative effort to really refine the project and ultimately get a better product in the end.
Due to the complicated nature of this.
It's very complicated, yes. It's also, we don't build incinerators every day, somewhat unique. They're kind of, these two improvements at two of our biggest plants would then kind of mirror each other. So you have some synergy there because you're going to have, ultimately, you may have employees going between the two incinerator facilities, run them. So it also allowed that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So some things that we did along the way to help control the cost. This is the second project where we incorporated escalation, de-escalation language into the contract. This really was us trying to share in the risk with the contractor. We wanted the language to be fair and measurable. We wanted it to be commodity-based and equipment-based. So we have different segments of the escalation, de-escalation language to address each of those items. Also, the way it works, the prices are documented at the basis of bid or when the bid is put into us, and then we can monitor when they go to order equipment and when they go to buy commodities if the price went up or down. And that was kind of something we incorporated on our large Merrimack treatment plant project, and we also did it here. It's somewhat new to us, somewhat new to the contractors, I'll be honest. We didn't see a lot of examples around the country, but we thought it was appropriate here to share in the risk of the project. We also made project scope adjustments. We removed all non-essential scope items out of the project. We seen the cost going up, and we wanted to address that, so we really tried to beat out all the things that we could that didn't make sense to build anymore. We also incorporated a base price and an alternative price. The base price included 4 incinerator trains at our Bissell plant and 3 incinerator trains at our Lemay plant. Ultimately, the alternative price incorporated only 3 trains at our Bissell plant, so it scaled back the project there. As a result of that, we would have to rely on more creative ways to operate the system, possibly hauling at times from Lemay to Bissell and Bissell to Lemay. We've also started post-construction, post-award negotiations to help see if there's any other areas that we can work with the design build team to further bring down the cost. Next slide, please.
I have a question before you move on. The non-essential scope items that were removed, what were the sort of the big pieces of that?
We originally looked at doing some rehab work to one of our basins, and it made sense because they were there. Due to the cost escalation, we didn't think that made sense anymore. There was a laundry list of items. We could share that with you if you'd like.
Brad, that's a normal process. If we can get things done cheaper because somebody's on site, we try to insert that in our projects if we can, don't we?
Yeah, especially at treatment plants. I always say the curve goes straight up when you go into a treatment plant. The cost of upfront cost is just more because you're working in a plant environment. So we often bundle projects together to help reduce the cost.
And do you know how much we saved by removing those non-essential scope items?
I don't offhand. I could get back to you. Sorry about that. I don't know.
What are we going to do with the existing incinerators after the new ones are up and running? They going to be demoed or incorporated into the new ones somehow?
No, they'll be demoed. Yeah. Yeah, there's not a lot of opportunity to share in the costs there. So.
And that's part of in the bid?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Next slide, please. The last thing I had here, I just wanted to point out, we're not the only ones that are seeing the cost escalation. It's just one of those times where we benefit when the economy is not doing well, perhaps, and get good bids. And this is one of those times where inflation has caught up with us. You see the example there, they're doing an expansion at the Dome. They've had to really be creative with how they're going to do that. The one on the right is an article with the Post. MoDOT's had to scale back their program somewhat. And then St. Louis County has had to really reel in some of the road projects just because of that cost escalation going up. When things move quicker than your budgets, it's hard to keep up with that. I'd now entertain any questions if you have any more. All right, thank you.
Okay, I'll bring it home here. This is Brett Berthold, the Director of Operations. Our recommendation is to proceed with the upgrade of the fluidized bed incineration project at both the Bissell and Lee May treatment plant. And as Rich outlined at the beginning of the presentation, this meets our goals. It handles all of the biosolids that we generate at our treatment plants. It certainly addresses the aging infrastructure, those incinerator trains and dewatering equipment are all 50 to 60 years old and need to be replaced. It really reduces air emissions, and it lets us meet the more stringent, newer air emission standards and regulations. So that's really a win-win. And it really balances, our environmental, financial impacts to our customers. So our recommendation is to proceed with the project because it's the most cost-effective and environmentally beneficial solution for handling our biosolids. And with that, trustees, that concludes our formal presentation. We're here for as many questions as you may have.
Brett, really quickly, can you tell me on the cost of this thing? Both operational costs, so ongoing, what's it going to cost us to operate this thing? And then these incinerators will cost us more or less with this new technology. And then obviously there's going to be a financing cost and I think Tim spoke about some sources at our last meeting, but I don't know that he was able to identify specifically what the annual cost would be for Carrie. I was wondering if we were able to get answers on those two questions.
So I can't speak for Tim. I will let you know, Tim has spoken in the past that we're financing this through state revolving fund loans and WIFIA loans, as well as, I believe, some cash financing. What I will speak to from an operational standpoint, these should be much more efficient incinerators. We should be able to utilize the organic content to help us reduce the amount of natural gas we consume to process these. From a personnel and labor standpoint, we don't see a large increase or decrease right now. We'll know more as we go forward. We have highly trained mechanics, electricians that have all the licenses that they need to operate this type of equipment. This isn't vastly different than what we're currently doing. We know how to process and repair this equipment. Of course, there will be a learning curve, but we think I would hope that in the future we're either flat or go down a little bit because this is newer equipment. Certainly in the beginning, we're not going to have to be doing as many as repairs as we're currently having to do with the existing multiple hearth incinerators.
Trustee Wabi, I can add just a little bit on the financing side. Right now, we know we have two options that are currently presented to us. Both are probably available. One is through WIFIA, which Brett had mentioned, that's direct borrowing from the federal government. Those are below market rate loans. Those are available to us. And since this has been going on, we do work through the SRF. Just to remind everybody, SRF, the debt service is subsidized 70% by the federal government. So it's usually our best bet as far as interest rates. They have expressed a desire to even provide more funds. to make sure we can cover the cost of the project. So as of today, right now, those are still available. Like everything, when you pull those loans, you got to wait till closing time to see exactly what the interest rate's going to be. In the past, they've been as low as under 1% for SRF. I think time I talked with Tim, it's going somewhere around the 2% area, but that'll depend on when the loans actually close.
Well, let's just do it in sort of nominal terms without interest. I mean, we're talking $30 million a year. Are we talking? We're going to finance under this proposal $900 million, almost $1 billion. What's the expected impact on the district's cash flow? What is that predicted debt service carry for a year?
So I don't have the exact number.
A range is fine.
Right, yeah, and I don't have the range either. I think that's something we'll have to get you. I will tell you, the staff's done a great job for our 2021 through 2024 fiscal years. With all the other COVID impacts, we stayed within the money that was allocated that was approved by the rate commission. We're going to get impacted in 25 through 28. Those costs for this incinerator, we had the prices early enough. They're included in that rate proposal. Since we borrow so much money, obviously rates are going to go up. They're going to go up a little bit more because the incinerator's gone up, and quite honestly, some of the prices through the entire program is going up because of just the inflationary impact on every part of our capital program. So that is built into the rate proposal that the rate commission's currently looking at. As far as I can talk to Tim and see what he can make available to the trustees. The problem is he doesn't know what interest rate we're talking about. So I can see what kind of information he can give you around the question.
Yeah, we just got to project out what's the anticipated. Obviously we can't predict what the interest rate's going to be when we close these financings, but within reason. What's the annual cost going to be to finance this $900 million?
So again, I'll see what he can give you since you're familiar with the industry. The debt payment schedules can vary, front end loaded, back end loaded, when you pay interest, when you pay principal. So I'm going to leave that to Tim to provide as much of a general piece of information as he can for the trustees.
Thank you.
How much has MSD already spent on the design process for these?
I think with our design, not sure I'm working, with our design build owner's rep right now, we've spent approximately 12 million, or that's what we've appropriated. And then we had another appropriation planned with this where the owner's rep would take over as our field rep at actually construction management. And then we had the two proposers that were not selected, each received $1 million stipend. So right now, around 14 million.
And I'm guessing if we were to reject all the bids and go a different way or slow this thing down, it would be we would take another $1 million hit for the low bidder.
Yeah, Trustee Wabi, this is Brian Holscher. The contractor's bid is good through July, and we're probably good through the July board meeting on the current proposal. We get past that, we start running into potential legal liabilities around consent decree schedules, meeting clean air regulations, expiring clean air permits, and having to start processes over. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. This is probably not the right forum for that, but we're pushing up against a wall by the July meeting. Now, that doesn't mean the board can't decide to say no. That is always a possibility. But I think at some point, we're going to have to sit down and have a discussion around what you just asked, and there's a lot of legal issues there that this is probably not the correct forum for that.
But we could get the staff to work on a nice, a good document that would give us, what the potential risks are, to the legal risks and consequences might be to the district, if we decided not to go down the path of accepting this, correct?
And I think there is a time when we have to schedule to sit down and go through all those. They're somewhat fuzzy because there's a lot of regulatory discretion or press that we don't have control of. And I think we will have to have another discussion with that in a different forum for that issue.
Thank you.
Shauna?
If you guys are done, we're on to Sean. I just want, as long as.
Any
Chairman,
other
you think
questions?
everybody's done.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I've got a couple. Yeah, I know we looked at this thing, back in 2018 and projected the cost to be $350 million and then $360 million, and then things have changed. And one of those things that's changed is the Inflation Reduction Act 2022. President Biden passed through the Congress, and I'm wondering if did we take a look at any of the incentive programs that are outlined in that or authorized in that act, around bio digestion tax credits and things like that? Have we looked at any of those things, or are we too far down the path on this one or this strategy to throw those out?
So Trustee Wabi, this is Brian Holscher again. So I'm going to give you a partial answer to that. Those federal dollars are fed down through the state, and the same will be with the the Reduction Act and the other monies. The state of Missouri right now is just finishing up ARPA dollars. Those are the ones we've been participating in and getting grants for those. We've had an initial discussion a couple weeks ago with the state entity that will be managing any dollars that come down to the state. That hasn't happened yet. We had some preliminary discussions about not this, but other projects we could do with it that would be provide additional environmental benefits, grants to be able to put the project up so that we get the environmental benefits for those. But the state's not right now in a position to do anything with those. Those monies haven't come down through the state yet. So we did have that initial discussion with them. We're just kind of having preliminary discussions. Because we start this project now does not mean that we can't have available funding for future parts of the appropriation for this project.
But did we look at the biodigestion option? That I know there's tax credits associated with that. That I know we can't take tax credits as a public entity, but I do think there's a direct payment in lieu of taxes, or in lieu of tax credits that we could look at if we went to a different technology.
So we can have that discussion, but I think I'd send you back to the discussion Jay was giving you, that we have to have a technology that works for our situation. That's a different, there's a part of that that Jay had a discussion about. I can have him go through that a little bit more if he'd like.
Well, I just know that, I know that Kansas City's got that Caw Point biosolids plant. I think I don't think this is a technology that is, maybe it doesn't address our situation precisely, but I'd just like to look at it because I think the economics may be substantially better than burning a bunch of waste product and spending $1 billion.
Dave, you comfortable answering that, or?
Yeah, let me just say a couple things to that. See, Kansas, can you hear me okay?
Move closer
Yes.
to you, Jay.
Thank you. And I think, first off, I appreciate the question, and I want to assure you that we are always looking for better ways, more cost-effective ways, ways that are environmentally responsible to do our mission. And so we, the THP or thermohydrolysis process is something that we have looked at, and it's something that other utilities are looking at. The situation with the Mississippi River and its impact on our how we process biosolids is different. And I'm going to get into the weeds with you a little bit, but I don't know how else to do that. So, Kansas City's volatile content's probably in the 40 to 50% range, even at High River. Our volatile content, our fuel content's probably going to be 25 to 30%. It's significantly less. And when you have that low volatile content, that makes digestion very, very difficult. Also, the digestion process, they're working on in Kansas City, it takes 18 months to produce biosolids. Our incineration process produces in biosolids within a day. We take biosolids in, we incinerate them, we push them out. When you take a process like what Kansas City is doing, you have to have land to apply the material. Kansas City owns about, I think they own right now about 1,500 acres of land. They need about 3,000 acres to operate that system. We don't own any land, and we don't have a process to apply that sludge right now. And if we did, I think we'd be doing it at the facilities where we actually do this digestion. We have this technology at our Missouri River Treatment Plant. So it's something that in the right situation for the right people, for the right reasons, it makes sense. It just doesn't make sense for MSD right now. And the Inflation Reduction Act is something that we're watching very closely. And if it makes sense in the future that we can incorporate the benefits of that bill into our projects and into how we operate, we absolutely will.
Well, I have a question. I don't know the question about that, but you mentioned I mentioned Kansas City. You mentioned Kansas City and the scale of it. I mean, have we thought about looking at this thing not just from and Brian's going to kill me for this, but not just for the confines of the district, but can we look at a more regional approach to servicing this bio waste in a way that may be cheaper, and frankly, a way that we can address this. I got to believe folks in St. Charles are having waste problems too. Certainly, looking at their water, the newspaper and the water issues. I mean, could we create a much more regional approach to this thing and potentially reduce the cost dramatically? I mean, maybe we can talk to the folks in Illinois.
I just want to say, with regard to the regional question, I mean, our quantity of biosolids is so significant that we need to be able to process where we generate those biosolids. And the other facilities in Missouri are much smaller. So there's a difference in scale there. I just want to mention that.
So there's difference in scale in Kansas City? Or there's difference in scale in our region?
There's a difference in scale in our region and in Kansas City. The Kansas City facility is about, there's a difference in both cases, but with response to the region and the St. Louis region, our facilities are much larger than the ones in St. Charles or regional counties.
But don't those places produce bio, I'm not sure what the term to use, I would use a different term when we're not in a public setting. But I mean, isn't the waste product they produce and the processes that they're using similar to what we're using?
The other, I honestly don't know right now. I couldn't tell you what the other facilities use in specific technologies, but they're not using incineration technologies within the St. Louis metro region.
I guess I'm just, I'm perplexed. I'm trying to figure out a way to reduce the cost of this thing. It is, I think I share my sentiments with the rest of the trustees. It's a lot of money. And we just got to figure out a different way to skin this rabbit. It doesn't, and I think we should be looking at other alternatives especially greener ones if we can, and ones that the federal government will help us pay for. Not that they're going to help us, not that they're not going to help us pay for this one, but I mean, if we can reduce capital costs substantially by going to a different technology, then the savings that we're going to get on the federal dollars on the the interest support is really de minimis compared to reducing capital costs by 30 or 40% because the technology is cheaper. And then the federal government pays somebody, whether it be us or another entity we contract with, they give those tax credits. And those tax credits, I did just a little bit of research, they're 40% of the capital cost. I think that's where I think we should be looking.
So I have a question. You talked about on your slide that you were talking about searching for a solution. You have listed a domino effect for other infrastructure needs. Are there, if we were to go with a different model around digestion, would there be additional costs related to other things? Like what, can you give us more detail on that domino effect?
Right. The domino effect, right. So, if you're going with a digestion process for Lima or Bissell, if you're talking about digesting and producing natural gas, for instance, then you're going to need a pipeline to put the natural gas in. I don't know that we don't have the infrastructure right now to produce the gas to put it into the pipeline. That's something that would need to happen. I talked about the biosolids land application is something that you do not year round. That's something that you do in a very specific period of time in the fall. So you have to be able to store material, store that digested biosolids. We don't have biosolid storage facilities. That's going to be a significant cost. I talked about the land. If you own land, you can apply the sludge or biosolids. If you don't own the land, then you have to have a farmer. You have to pay somebody to not only take them, but that's an ongoing operating cost. And then you have to have, and in our case, I think, probably north of 5,000 acres of land that we would need to apply all of that material. It would be a significant undertaking, thousands of trucks in a very short period of time to take all that material and distribute it all over. That would be a very significant undertaking. So there are just a lot of pieces and parts if you go that direction that we're just not set up for right now.
Jay, you'd be talking about, just so we understand, you've got a large quantity at Lima and Bissell. We would be talking about a continuous trucking operation of sludge from those facilities to any offsite facility, correct?
Correct. I also can't emphasize this point enough, that the digestion processes that are being thrown out here as an alternative don't remove PFAS. And that there's considerable uncertainty about the future of applying fertilizer from biosolids in the future. And if you talk with other utilities that use that process now, they're very concerned about that. And they're envious of our position, that we have choices that they don't necessarily have. And that's why we're bringing.
Are we using landfill now? I mean, if we're burning the sludge and we're grabbing the PFAS before it gets out, and then we're taking that and we're putting it in the landfill, right?
Correct.
Why can't we use a biodigestion system and pull the PFAS out of there and bury them?
So there are technical chemical reasons that get into the process, thermohydrolysis process. So that process gets to a couple hundred degrees, and that process isn't sufficient to break down the PFAS versus incineration that's over 1,000 degrees. So that's the reason, is that the chemistry of the PFAS doesn't lend itself to extraction or removal from the biosolids.
I think just to build on Jay's talking about the PFAS and the questions in the future. There are solid examples. The state of Maine no longer allows land application of biosolids. Maine is trucking their biosolids to Canada. That was their reaction to this. Every state is kind of reacting differently, but Jay's saying there's something in the future. There's actually real examples that are happening right now throughout the country.
Yeah, and this is, there's been a lot of press about this. Chicago MWRD recently got a lot of press coverage about their land application processes and issues, and Illinois farm fields and land, and so we're watching that. We're thinking about that very carefully, and that influences what we think the future looks like.
Any more questions? Thank you, guys. Shauna, we're going to discuss incinerator subcontractor evaluation.
Thank you, trustees. Good evening. We received several inquiries, a couple of inquiries, one from MOCAN on May 2nd in the form of an email, and the second one from Mikhail Ali of African American Business and Contractors Association. We received 2 letters on May 11th from Mr. Ali, and he also made public comments during the board meeting held in May. And so what I wanted to do was cover the concerns that were outlined in the correspondence that we received. And there are, what I have is 4 major points that they brought up. The first is the NAICS codes that one of the subcontractors that have been presented to participate on the project under codes and blockers to perform furnishing and installation of rebar and metals. There was a concern there that the NAICS codes that the subcontractor possessed from the certification agency did not support that scope of work. The other point they brought up was that Sims Building Construction, as an MBE, did not have the qualifications to self-perform the work that was identified for them for that scope of work. They also stated that Sims Building is not a signatory to a collective bargaining agreement with the iron workers. And the last point they made was that Sims would not be performing what we call a commercially useful function on the project if they subcontracted out the labor component of their scope of work to a non-eligible firm. I responded to MOCAN's inquiries on May 5th, and I responded to APCA's correspondence on May 19th. The correspondence was then forwarded to the board for review. In addition to that, I also forwarded a synopsis of the diversity subcontractor evaluation, the components of that evaluation that were performed to determine whether or not Sims would would be approved to perform as a certified MBE contractor on the project. And so I can answer any questions that you might have regarding the information that was provided for both responses, as well as the information on the evaluation that was, given, where you were given an outline of the rigorous things that we cover in our evaluation process.
What is Sim's scope of work?
Sims's scope of work is...
Why are we hiring a contractor to hire another contractor to perform? Why? I'm used to generals, iron workers, that the general does it. We have a general contractor. Are they going to be employing any? I want to know where Sims fits in all this. Are
Sims,
they a dress out outfit or an iron worker outfit?
Sims was presented to provide furnishing and installation of rebar and metals. And through our clarification process, the more specific information that they will be performing states that they will do reinforcement of foundations, walls, slabs, and cast piles.
Okay.
So that is their specific scope of work. Through our clarification process, it was determined that they do not plan to subcontract any of that scope to another subcontractor. They will self-perform the full scope of work that they were presented to provide. Is there any other information that I could provide?
And they are not signatory, right?
Well, through our clarification process, it was revealed to us that the prime contractor is in fact working on some type of labor agreement that will be a component of this project.
And his intent is to have the entire project, his intent, he stated to us, he hasn't signed everything because we don't have a contract, is to have a project labor agreement so that all work on the project is done by union labor.
And when you say we're talking about Blocker?
The prime contractor will commit that all work on his entire project, he's responsible for the entire project site, that his intent is to have a project labor agreement. I assume more than just for that, there's probably work conditions and everything that goes into that, shift work, that type of stuff. His intent is to have a project labor agreement. That wasn't a requirement in our proposal, but it is something he voluntarily indicated. And as we understand, we confirmed that that is still his intent if he's awarded the project.
So Sims is just coming in to do rebar. Who's doing the casting of the tilt-up walls? Who's doing?
The specifics of their scope
It's just rebar, installing and furnishing rebar and metals.
Right, the rebar and metals, the reinforcement of the foundations, walls, and slabs.
Okay. Is that concluded?
That's all I have,
Thank you.
unless you have some more questions.
No. Thank you,
Okay.
Shauna.
Thank you.
No, is there?
So Trustee Nichols, as I committed in my statement, we've now, I believe, covered at least all the technical aspects that we've been asked to cover. I think there's still, I mentioned earlier, there are some legal aspects that I think it's good for the board to understand. The question is becoming, where does the board want to go with this? We have right now about an hour of the program management committee meeting on Tuesday that could be available to talk about anything the board wants to talk about. And then obviously proceeding there up till the time the board says, we're done, we would like you to put the proposal up for consideration. So I'm looking for some input from the Board of Trustees about where they want to head with this issue. If there's now or later, if we can find out other topics or a schedule at a later time, just at this meeting or later, just find out what you want staff to do as we proceed forward, what additional information you need.
I, for one, would like to continue the discussion on the legal piece.
So with that, we can do that in closed session at we would put it at the end of the meeting, and it would go from about 7:45 to 8:45. We have about an hour's time between our meeting and rate commission. So we can schedule that for next Tuesday if the board is in agreement. I'm seeing shaking heads saying yes. I can't see trustee Watson or trustee Wabi, but I'm probably going to take the chairman's word that that's where we go with it. So I guess that'll be the next step. The only thing I'd offer, I guess, you've heard the staff talk on the technical side. I'm sure that may not be everything. Feel free to contact the folks if you want some more detailed information. And as we go along, if there's something you want big picture presented to the entire Board of Trustees, let us know and we'll schedule another time that we can do that. But right now, we'll schedule a closed session for the legal issues for next Tuesday at the end of the Stakeholders Committee meeting. And trustee or chairman Nick Zisson, that's all I had to say this evening.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry, I have one more thing that I think would be helpful. And it might be around a communication strategy regarding the people who live in the communities where these proposed incinerators are going to be built. And I think it would be helpful to hear how we intend to communicate with the neighbors.
Yeah, we had a general letter and then we got a very kind of specific one. Staff, we got that today. So staff is going to sit down and just see kind of presenting everything you've seen here and present that to the folks. This is, I think the biggest misunderstanding is we're building something new somewhere when what we're doing is just upgrading and making better existing systems within the plants. And so I think we can, we will set up a time, we'll commit to figure out how and when that can be done. We will, once I know what that schedule is, I think, Chairman, if you don't mind, I think I need to get back to you to see how that matches up with the rest of the schedule for board meetings. So.
I didn't need to hear it today. I just want to ensure that
we'll get it to you and see what we can
point.
see what we can get set up for that.
Thank you.
Also on that point, maybe what we've done so far as well to communicate with the community would be useful.
Okay, and we did mention just the three highlighted ones who are publicly been, I would mention the NAACP has actually been involved in this because of a side issue for almost 10 years now. So we mentioned those three. There are others, and I think Bess is probably the right person. We'll gather together everybody else who's been presented with what we're going to do and other community entities that we've gotten feedback from. And we can provide that information as well.
Okay, there's no other business. Next tentative meeting date may be May 30th, 2023. Can I get a motion for adjournment?
Move. Second.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.